To our family, Lena was everything. She was kind, gentle and thoughtful of others. Lena was robbed of all her tomorrows with us.
Mount Albert is one of Auckland, New Zealand's oldest and most storied inner suburbs, nestled in the heart of the city, just a short drive from the bustling central business district. Its origins date back to the mid-19th century, when the area was primarily rural, and the towering volcanic peak of Mount Eden dominating the landscape. Named after Prince Albert, the consort of Queen Victoria, the suburb began to take shape as Auckland expanded, with settlers gradually transforming the open countryside into a thriving community. The suburb's development accelerated in the early 20th century as Auckland's growing population pushed outward from the city centre. Mount Albert became a desirable residential area, known for its large, stately homes, wide streets, and proximity to green spaces like Owairaka, Domain and Western Springs. The arrival of the tramway system in the early 1900s further spurred growth, making it easier for residents to commute to the city and other parts of Auckland. Throughout the decades, Mount Albert has maintained its charm, balancing its rich history with modern amenities. The suburb is home to a diverse population, reflecting Auckland's broader multicultural identity. Mount Albert's namesake, the volcanic cone of Owairaka, continues to be a prominent feature, offering panoramic views of the city and serving as a reminder of the area's ancient geological past. However, like any other community, Mount Albert is not immune to the darker undercurrents that can sometimes surface. On the morning of the 21st of September 2021, as the suburb began to settle into the quiet rhythm of dusk, a woman set out for her usual jog. She moved with purpose along the familiar streets. The air was cool, the sky tinged with the last light of the day, and the streets were mostly empty. Unbeknownst to the woman, a man sat in a parked car nearby, watching her intently. His gaze followed her as she ran past. He then followed and pulled up beside her and tried to strike up a conversation. The woman made it clear that she wasn't interested, but that didn't deter the man. He followed her for several moments, pulled up ahead of her and watched her pass him. This continued for several minutes, but then the man sped up ahead of her and turned his car to face her. The car rolled forward. Then, with a sudden, violent lurch, he swerved onto the pavement, aiming the vehicle directly at her. She leaped out of the way, her heart racing as the car screeched past, narrowly missing her by inches. The vehicle sped off into the early morning haze, leaving the woman shaken and breathless on the sidewalk. She had a lucky escape, but just 24 hours later, another woman wouldn't be quite as lucky. Lena Zhang Harrap was born on the 8th of November 1993. From the very start, it was clear that Lena was special. Born with Down syndrome and vision impairment, she faced challenges that many would find daunting, yet she never allowed her disabilities to define her. Lena underwent open heart surgery as a baby, a battle that earned her the title of Little Warrior by her loved ones. However, her biological parents found the challenges too overwhelming, and at just 5 days old, she was put up for adoption. Lena was soon embraced by the Harrap family, with Martin and Sue becoming the loving parents that she needed. Growing up on Jersey Avenue in Mount Albert, Lena was surrounded by love and unwavering support. Her adoptive parents encouraged her to be independent, and she thrived under their care, becoming a loving and caring soul who was always ready with a hug or a kind word. Her father, Martin, fondly described her as caring, funny, and clever. Despite her vision impairment, Lena had an acute sense of the world, understanding people and situations with an empathy that was far beyond her years. When she was 9 years old, she became involved in the children's charity, Heart Kids New Zealand. She attended their events each month and fundraised in the annual Shake a Bucket drive and coffee meetups. Family support strategic lead, Mahild Nuge, said of her, "She always loved helping with the bucket shaker. Watching her was always entertaining because she was just not shy. She approached anyone. If they didn't see her, she would tap them gently on their head and just wait. It was really hard to say no to her, so she always came back with a really full bucket." As she grew older, Lena attended Lynchfield College, where she blossomed both academically and socially. The college became her second home, a supportive community that celebrated her strengths and guided her through any challenges. Kath Nell, the principal of Lynchfield, fondly remembered Lena, saying, "Lena may have been small in stature, but she had the biggest heart. Her wicked sense of humour, backed up by a mischievous smile, brought much joy to those who taught her. Confident and independent, Lena placed no limitations on herself and gave everything her best shot." Lena's talents particularly shone in cookery classes and physical education, where her determination and creativity were on full display. By 2021, Lena was a 27-year-old woman living at home with her parents on Jersey Avenue. While she still had a childlike innocence, she embraced womanhood with grace and joy. She was known for her quirky attributes and affectionately answered to many nicknames, including Piglet, Beans, and Pie. Her neighbour, Yasmin Hutch, recalled, "Every time we crossed her path, she was always smiling and just such a happy young lady. We knew she was partially blind, but it never seemed to stop her enjoying day-to-day activities." Lena was a familiar face in the community, known for her infectious smile and positive spirit. She was a keen member of the Auckland Magic Movers, where she left a lasting impression on everybody that she met. She was also a constant presence at Idea Services Disability Organisation's Hub and Star Jam, a group that uses music, dance and performance to connect young people with disabilities. A keen dancer, Lena poured her heart into every routine, having been a dedicated member of the dance studio for the past 12 years. Ellis Stewart, who worked at Star Jam, spoke of Lena with admiration. "It was such a privilege to know Lena. She was always so enthusiastic with everything she did, and her love of dancing was truly wonderful to watch. She put the magic in Magic Movers." Lena Zhang Harrap stood in the doorway of her family home on Jersey Avenue, ready for her morning walk. It was 6:30 a.m. on the 22nd of September 2021, a crisp early autumn morning in Mount Albert. The streets were quiet, save for the rustle of leaves and the odd car driving past. The family were accustomed to this daily ritual. Though Lena had Down syndrome and was partially blind, she prided herself on her independence, particularly during these morning walks to Oaraka Domain. This is a park and garden in the middle of the suburbs. It's a popular place for walkers and joggers, with a football field in the middle and trees and paths along the outskirts. It was just a 4-minute walk from Lena's home, but she would walk around the streets first and then make her way to the park. It was her way of greeting the day, of embracing the world on her own terms. That morning she was dressed in a long-sleeved purple top and dark-coloured pants. But as the morning sun rose higher in the sky, Lena's parents noticed that she hadn't yet returned home. The hours trickled past, and by midday, her absence was impossible to ignore. Lena was a slow walker, but it had now been hours since she left the family home. Martin and Sue felt a gnawing worry settle in their hearts. They drove around the neighbourhood, but Lena was nowhere to be found. They reported her missing, prompting a large-scale hunt. Lena was very well known in the community, and people came out in their droves to search for her. But it wouldn't be long before she was discovered. At about 4:30 p.m. that afternoon, a volunteer searcher was walking along a narrow walkway between Grand Avenue and Summit Drive. The day had been a long one, filled with a sense of urgency, as she and the others had scoured the area for any sign of Lena. The brush along the path was thick, blocking out most of the sunlight. As the searcher continued along the walkway, something in the near distance caught her eye. It was a small, indistinct shape on the ground, partially obscured by the brush. At first, she wasn't sure what she was seeing, but a sense of foreboding gripped her as she moved closer. Her steps slowed, her breath catching in her throat as the shape became clearer. When she was close enough to see, her heart sank. It was Lena. Lena's small frame lay motionless on the ground, her body twisted awkwardly among the leaves and dirt. It was immediately clear that she was deceased. The volunteer was stunned as she took in the sight of Lena's bruised and battered face, the delicate features now marred by violence. The gentle smile that had so often lit up her face was gone, replaced by a haunting stillness. Beside Lena's body, there was something else that made the volunteer's stomach turn. A pile of blood-soaked clothing, its dark fabric contrasting sharply against the green of the foliage. But the clothing wasn't Lena's. The clothing was larger, and it clearly belonged to whoever had killed her. With trembling hands, the volunteer reached for her phone to call for help. In a matter of minutes, the area was cordoned off as detectives and crime scene experts arrived to begin their examination. After her body was photographed and documented as it was found, Lena was transported to the medical examiner's office, where the horrors of her death were on full display. Lena had been brutally beaten and then strangled to death. There were 13 bruises and abrasions to her head, as well as blunt force trauma that had caused brain injuries. Objects had been stuffed into her mouth, causing more injuries, and she had a number of bite marks to her body. Lena had also been raped with such force that it caused internal injuries. That same day, detectives held a press conference.
Unfortunately, we've called this press conference today because we've launched a homicide investigation following locating the deceased female at about 4:30 yesterday afternoon. A formal identification has not yet been completed, but we believe the person to be Lena Zhang, also known as Lena Zhang Harrap, who is age 27. She went missing in Mount Albert sometime between 6:30am and 7:30am, and we believe she walked from Jersey Ave along Richardson Road and then up Grand Ave. Lena is 130 centimetres tall. She is not tall at all. She has Down syndrome and she walked at a slow pace. She was wearing a long sleeve purple top and dark pants. We want to hear from anybody who saw her walking this route between 6:30 and 7:30am yesterday.
News of Lena's tragic death spread quickly, casting a dark cloud over the neighbourhood that had once been her sanctuary. Lena was an innocent woman taking an early morning walk, something all women should feel safe enough to do. She was also very well known in the suburban area, and tributes for her came flooding in. One neighbour, Michelle McGee, said to the NZ Herald, "She was a beautiful, funny and delightful soul." She said that her heart was aching for Lena and her family, and that she had touched so many people with her presence and soft-spoken nature. What further compounded the heartache was that Lena was disabled, and her murder sent shockwaves through the disabled community. Education Trust Upside Down said, "This is absolutely devastating news, and our community are currently coming to terms with it. Upside Down is currently working with the New Zealand Down Syndrome Association and the Auckland Down Syndrome Association on next steps." The entrance to Owaraka Domain became a makeshift memorial as people lay down flowers and cards. One local woman, Lucy Leslie, brought flowers from her own garden. She spoke with the media and said that she worked in special education and was devastated by what had happened. She said, "It's really important for people with special needs to be given independence, and to have this end so badly really just is worst case scenario and not fair at all. These people should feel protected at all costs." What particularly scared the residents, however, was the fact that it was clearly a random murder. People were scared to go out on their own, and especially walk anywhere on their own. In the past couple of years, Owaraka, where Lena liked to walk and where she was killed, had become much more overgrown. There was a noticeable increase in the density of the trees that surrounded the park. One local, Maureen Donnelly, commented, "Ever since the trees have grown, I've started to feel a little more aware of the fact that I'm isolated from view. I can remember once rushing up the steps as it was beginning to get dark and somebody else was on the walkway. You just began to feel unsafe now the trees were so high." The investigation into Lena's murder began with an intensity and urgency that shook the usually quiet community of Mount Albert. By the afternoon, the scene was swarming with detectives, forensic teams, and uniformed officers, all working tirelessly to uncover what had happened. Detective Inspector Aaron Pascoe announced in the media, "She was vulnerable, and whoever the offender or offenders are, have targeted a vulnerable member of our community, which is just appalling. We're determined to get to the bottom of this investigation and identify any person or persons who is responsible for her death." An investigation team was put together, named Operation Deleza, and they began their investigation. Inside the incident room, detectives pored over every detail of the case. They knew that Lena had left her family home at 6:30 a.m. that morning for her daily walk. It was a routine that she rarely deviated from, and her family had reported her missing when she hadn't returned home as expected. The fact that Lena had vanished on a route so familiar to her was chilling. It suggested that her killer had either crossed paths with her by chance, or even more disturbing, had been lying in wait. Retracing Lena's final steps was now the top priority. Detectives were keenly aware that somewhere along her walk she had encountered her killer. Every detail of her movements that morning became crucial to the investigation. Although the area was not heavily surveilled, there were a few key CCTV cameras positioned along the route that Lena often took. The footage showed her leaving Jersey Avenue, her figure small but determined as she walked along the quiet streets. The cameras captured her moving steadily along Richardson Road before turning on to Grand Avenue at around 7:30 a.m. This was the last time that she was seen alive on the camera. The footage provided some clues, but it also raised more questions. Had someone been following her just out of the camera's view? Did she meet her killer by chance, or had they been stalking her, waiting for the right moment to strike? Frame by frame, minute by minute, the detectives reviewed the footage from the handful of cameras positioned along Lena's route. They had already seen Lena herself, walking along Grand Avenue at around 7:30 a.m. But there was somebody else in the footage. The camera had captured a figure emerging into view shortly after 7:30 a.m, just minutes after Lena was last seen. The figure was a man, walking at a brisk pace along the quiet tree-lined street. The man in the footage was dark-skinned. He wore a blue jumper and his head was balding, with just a thin crown of hair encircling the top of his scalp. There was a distinctive mark on his forehead. He also wore a mask, obscuring the lower half of his face. But what stood out most was the man's clothing. It matched the blood-soaked clothing that was found beside Lena's body. This same man was later observed on CCTV boarding a train not too far from the crime scene. He was shirtless and was stopped by police, but since Lena hadn't been reported missing yet, police weren't suspicious of him.
I just went jogging without a shirt, like it was a hot day today for me.
Detectives released the CCTV images of the man and referred to him as a person of interest. They asked him to get in contact or asked anybody who could identify him to reach out. In tandem, they also asked that if anybody had seen Lena on her walk between 6:30 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. to call them. They added, "We also want to hear from any residents who live along any of the above streets, including Summit Drive, who have CCTV cameras that may have captured Lena or this male in a blue jumper walking past their property." After the CCTV images of the man were released, a young woman called police. She'd recognised him immediately. She'd been jogging in the area about 24 hours before Lena was attacked. It was around 6:40 a.m. when a man in a white Hyundai slowed down and stared at her. He then turned around and pulled up beside her on the side of the road and began speaking with her. The woman felt uneasy. She cut the man off and continued walking along the footpath. But the man continued to linger. He drove to a nearby car park and watched her, before driving ahead of her twice, pulling up and watching her pass. He made several U-turns to circle back to the woman. After about 20 minutes of this, the man turned so his car was facing the woman. He then began to accelerate as he approached her. He swerved to the left, over the curb, and onto the footpath about 5 metres ahead of her. His entire car was on the footpath as he tried to run the young woman over. She had to run to the right and into the grass beside the footpath to avoid the vehicle. She then ran to the nearest home and called police. It wasn't long before the man who had attacked the jogger and the man on the CCTV footage were identified. It was 31-year-old Shamal Sharma, a homeless man who had been living out of his car for several weeks. He was arrested at about 1:30 a.m. the next morning and was taken into the interrogation room. He told detectives that he had never seen the jogger or Lena in his life, that they had arrested the wrong man. However, there were bloodstains on the man's trousers and shoes. These were confiscated and forensically examined. The blood came back as a match to Lena. They had arrested the correct man, and he was charged with murder and sexual violation. Following the arrest, Detective Inspector Pascoe announced, "This was a sickening and senseless attack on a vulnerable member of our community, which we know disturbed and angered a lot of people. While nothing will bring Lena back to her family, we hope today's arrest provides a degree of comfort and reassurance, knowing the person allegedly responsible for her brutal murder is in custody where he belongs." As the case was making its way through the justice system, a Wellington gallery proudly displayed Lena's artwork. Jungle Tree sat among 84 other pieces at the pop-up gallery for the IHC Art Awards. The painting featured a colourful array of pieces of scrap fabric that had carefully been fashioned into the shape of a tree. The annual IHC Art Awards provide artists with an intellectual disability an opportunity to have their talent recognised, their voice heard, and to sell their work. Then in October, Sharma was ordered to undergo a psychological evaluation to assess his fitness to stand trial. There were no updates in the case until a year later. Sharma appeared at the High Court in Auckland on the 20th of October 2022. It was about a month before his murder trial was to begin. However, in court, Sharma pleaded guilty to the murder of Lena. He also pleaded guilty to sexual violation and driving a motor vehicle in a dangerous manner. At the sentencing phase in May, more details about Lena's murder were revealed. However, some aspects were reportedly too graphic to report. It was disclosed that Sharma was homeless, and he had encountered Lena as he walked past her on the opposite side of Grand Avenue. She was making her way to a bush-lined concrete pathway that led to Summit Road. As she walked up the road, he glanced back towards her on several occasions. He was loitering in the area until she began walking up a more remote wooded pathway. It wasn't known when exactly Sharma attacked Lena, but it was known that she was tortured over the course of 2 hours. She had been beaten, strangled and raped. Crown Prosecutor Matthew Nathan said to the judge, "This has a degree of sadism through the infliction of pain." Sharma had said in a medical assessment following his arrest that he didn't mean to do all those things to Lena, but that it was too late to turn back and he had to finish the job. Sharma had also spoken about being possessed by a demon. The prosecutor then mentioned the earlier attack on the jogger. He said that this was a rehearsal for his violent sexual attack on Lena just 24 hours later. The prosecutor informed the judge that Sharma had been living out of his car in the 2 weeks leading up to the murder. He had frequently been smoking methamphetamine, which triggered unhealthy sexual thoughts. The prosecutor also said that Sharma had long suffered from schizophrenia, but said that he was found to be legally sane at the time of the murder. The motivation, he said, was his desire for sexual violence. After the prosecutor stepped down, defence attorney Jonathan Hudson announced, "Mr. Sharma has asked me to convey his sincere apology for his offending. He has sincere and genuine remorse for what he's done." He denied that the 2 attacks were calculated and planned, and described them instead as being opportunistic. He described his client as somebody who was seriously disordered by mental health issues. He said that his client had been assessed by mental health professionals before the murder, before adding, "Unfortunately, he was returned to the community at that point. It's possibly a lost opportunity for some sort of intervention." The defence attorney also noted that his client had been abused during his younger years while living in Fiji, before he moved to New Zealand 10 years earlier. After the details of the case were read aloud in the courtroom, Lena's family stood up to provide their victim impact statements. Her mother, Sue, turned to Sharma in the dock and addressed him directly. She was blunt as she told him, "You could have chosen not to hurt her, to walk away." Through tears, she described her daughter as a little warrior. She said, "She was everything society said she couldn't be. She did everything society said she couldn't do. I love you, Beans, forever."
Mr. Sharma showed no regard for Lena, nor for Deirdre, the person he tormented the day prior, before finally attempting to run her over, leaving her literally running for her life. Left with victim's guilt for surviving when Lena didn't, yet both deserved the right to go for their walk. Lena did not have the traits of someone who is helpless or passive, but this happened because you took her purity and her innocence, taking her with you to the very depths of hell.
Her father, Martin, spoke of his daughter's love for dance and music. He struggled to hold his composure as he said, "Lena has gone and I'm heartbroken. Lena spent the last hours on this earth with the worst of humanity. She lost her life because Shamal Sharma wanted to satisfy his desires. He disposed of her as if she was rubbish. He said that Lena had wanted to do so much in her life, but all that had been taken from her. He talked about Lena's last moments on Earth, questioning, "I wonder when she realised she was in mortal danger, how long she was conscious, knowing she would die." The jogger that Sharma had attacked the day before he killed Lena also provided her own victim impact statement.
On the morning of the 21st of September 2021, a man approached me in a vehicle. This is not unusual. Every single woman I know has a story. I don't know how to apologise for surviving, and Lena didn't, for surviving and not being sure I wanted or deserved to. You may not have touched me, but what you did to me was violence.
She said to the courtroom, "To live as a woman in this world is to live in a body that is constantly under attack." She said that the stranger's unsolicited and unwanted approach that morning was not unusual, before adding, "Every woman knows this story." But the minutes that followed were terrifying and made all the worse when she learned about Lena's murder. Her immediate reaction was guilt. Guilt because she was safe, but Lena wasn't. After the victim impact statements were presented, Justice Edwin Wiley addressed Sharma.
Early in the morning of the 22nd of September 2021, Ms Harrap left her home address to begin her morning walk. You approached her and at some point you assaulted her. You then subjected her to a prolonged assault over a period of approximately 2 hours. You also sexually violated her. Ms Harrap died as a result of the injuries she had received from you. You left her body partially concealed amongst the bushes and shrubbery, approximately 5 metres off the pathway.
He said that he had a history of dishonesty, offending, addiction to drugs and mental health disorders. He said that his offending included a high level of brutality and callousness against a profoundly vulnerable woman, who was described as childlike by relatives. He stated, "In my view, your remorse is too late, and I'm suspicious of its sincerity." He then sentenced him to life in prison. Outside of court, Lena's family members came together and joined in an emotional waiata in her honour. Her mother then said,
To our family, Lena was everything. She was kind, gentle and thoughtful of others.
To a daughter, a sister, a cousin, a niece.
Lena was robbed of all her tomorrows with us. Her fun, her laughter, her joy. No sentence is long enough.
Well, besties, that is it for this episode of Morbidology Plus. As always, thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for joining me here up on Patreon. The support on here seriously goes such a long way, and I genuinely do appreciate every single one of you. Morbidology is a one-woman team, so all the support really helps the show continue to run. Remember to check us out at morbidology.com for more information about this episode and to read some true crime articles. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and have an amazing week.